Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to one of the seven most disturbing cases you've ever heard, and this is true crime. This is Maulin Rathod.
Young Indian student has been killed after an online date went terribly wrong.
He was a very humble personality, very jolly nature. He used to crack jokes.
The woman in custody over the attack on Maulin, she's expected to have her charges upgraded.
On Monday, July 23rd, 2018, an emergency call was made to the Sunbury police station in Melbourne, Australia at 9 p.m. The call was so strange and disturbing that the police weren't sure whether to believe it or not. The female caller calmly confessed to killing someone and enjoying it. When officers were dispatched to the address, they recognized the young woman who answered the door as 19-year-old Jamie Lee Delagai. Inside the apartment, they found 25-year-old Maulin Rathod lying motionless in the bedroom. As Maulin was rushed to hospital, Jamie was taken in for questioning. Officers were about to uncover a twisted tale of fetishes and fantasies. What led to the fateful meeting between Jamie and Maulin? And what transpired that led to such a tragic incident? The coastal city of Melbourne in southern Australia is the capital of the state of Victoria. With a population of over 5 million, Melbourne has been voted the most livable city in the world for 7 straight years. It's also known for being one of the safest cities in the world. Considered a cultural melting pot, the city combines stunning architecture and a vibrant art scene to offer residents a unique living experience while drawing millions of tourists each year to its sunny shores. Apart from the beautiful vistas, the city's home to top-tier infrastructure, a robust healthcare system, and quality educational institutions, one of the many things that attracted Maulin Rathod to pursue his higher education in Melbourne. Maulin Rathod was born in Ahmedabad in the state of Gujarat, India. He was the only child of Hiran and Jagrudi Rathod. Maulin grew up in a humble home and enjoyed playing and watching cricket. He was described by friends and family as a modest person with a jolly nature, who was also hardworking and ambitious.
He was a very humble personality, very jolly nature. He used to crack jokes, and he loved to play cricket.
After completing his high school education, Maulin pursued an undergraduate degree in accounting. Upon completing the course, he applied for a student visa to further his studies at the Charles Sturt University in Melbourne, Australia. His parents were supportive of his choices and sold their bungalow in India to finance his studies in Australia. At the age of 21, Maulin made the move to Melbourne and began living in the suburb of Elsternwick. Maulin worked as a delivery driver to support himself as an international student. Maulin remained very close to his parents and called them almost every day. He also proved to be a diligent student and earned good grades while at university. His professors were so impressed with his dedication and work ethic that he was offered a permanent job at the university upon completing his studies. Maulin was 4 months away from completing his master's degree in accounting when tragedy struck. In the early evening of July 23, 2018, Maulin logged on to the popular dating site Plenty of Fish. While looking through several profiles, he came across one that caught his attention. The profile belonged to a 19-year-old woman named Jamie Lee Delagai. Her online profile intrigued Maulin. She was upfront and honest about her issues with mental health in her profile, and also expressed her deepest, darkest desires. At around 7 p.m., Maulin messaged Jamie on the dating site. They exchanged several flirtatious messages. Jamie confided in Maulin about her interest in fantasy roleplay and obsession with vampires. Curious and interested, Maulin allegedly promised Jamie that he'd do anything she wanted to try. They arranged to meet at Jamie's apartment in Sunbury, Melbourne later that night. Jamie promised him she'd put on a costume and use her favorite perfume. Shortly after 8 p.m., Maulin knocked on Jamie's apartment door. After some small talk, the two of them spoke about what they were planning to do that night. Jamie expressed her interest in roleplay, and Maulin told her he was keen to experiment with her. They agreed that Maulin would tap out when things got too rough for him. The two of them engaged in very rough, intimate acts and continued toward Jamie's bedroom. It was then that things took a turn for the worse. While engaging in what Jamie referred to as choke play, Maulin started to tap out. Jamie, however, had become too absorbed in the game and started to choke Maulin with an electrical cord. He eventually lost consciousness. Jamie then called the Sunbury Police Department to report that she'd just killed Maulin. When police officers and paramedics arrived at the apartment, Jamie answered the door. Police officers knew Jamie and the address very well. They'd been called by several neighbors over the years to report violent disturbances at Jamie's apartment. These included physical altercations with friends and Jamie's strange animal-like delusions. Emergency services entered the apartment and found Maulin in the bedroom. He was unconscious and barely breathing. An electrical cord from an adult toy had been wrapped around his neck. Maulin was stabilized by paramedics and rushed to the Sunshine Hospital in St. Albans, Melbourne. Jamie was taken aside by officers and asked a few questions about what had happened to Maulin. She became hysterical and began to shout at officers, accusing them of not believing her, and insisted that she'd killed Maulin. Jamie was arrested and taken to the police station, where she was charged with attempted murder and recklessly causing serious injury. After being booked into custody, Jamie was taken in for questioning so that officers could get a clear picture of what had occurred in her apartment that night. Little did they know, they were about to hear a story that was equal parts disturbing and bizarre. Jamie told officers she'd logged into the dating app Plenty of Fish earlier that evening to check for new messages. It was then that she saw Maulin's messages and decided to start a conversation with him. Jamie explained to officers that she was having one of her bad days, and after speaking to Maulin, the feeling had grown worse. Once they agreed to meet, Jamie knew she wanted to kill him that night. She then went online and began to search for ways to kill someone. She clicked on a link called 10 Steps for Committing Murder and Getting Away with It. When Maulin arrived at her apartment after 8 p.m., she began sizing him up and realized she could easily overpower and strangle him. Jamie told Maulin that she wanted to do some roleplay, to which he quickly agreed. Jamie described Maulin as being eager to try anything she suggested, even when she warned him that things could get dangerous. She repeatedly told Maulin that she had psychopathic tendencies and was not going to let him out of the house. Maulin, however, seemed eager to experiment and assured her that he wasn't scared. All Maulin asked her was not to hurt him. Jamie agreed that when things got too rough, he could tap, and she'd immediately stop the game. However, Jamie confessed to officers that, in her mind, it was never going to be a game. From the moment she agreed to meet Maulin, she knew he would be her victim. She explained to officers that she had two different personalities.
Okay.
One was mean and destructive.
Thank you.
The other one was caring and nice. Jamie said that the entire time she had Maulin in her apartment, she had hoped he'd get scared, run away, and call the police. But he kept going along with the game. Jamie said she eventually started choking Maulin from behind with her bare hands. It was then the overwhelming urge to kill him grew intense. Maulin started to panic, and his fear felt enticing to Jamie. When Maulin started to tap, she squeezed harder and wrapped her legs around his body to get a tighter grip. She described whispering in his ear that it was all going to be okay and that everything would be over soon. By then, Maulin was in a full-blown panic and tried to wriggle out of Jamie's grip, but she sat on his back to prevent his escape. In a matter of seconds, Maulin went limp. Still riding the high of attempted murder, Jamie looked for something to strangle him with. She tried a USB cable at first, but it wasn't strong enough. She then found an adult toy and wrapped a thicker electrical cord around his neck. Baffled by Jamie's confession, officers asked her what drove her to commit the crime. Jamie compared her urge to kill with wanting to smoke a cigarette. Jamie confessed to police that before calling the station, she'd gone online once again. This time she'd looked up ways to be admitted to hospital after committing a murder. The interview grew more disturbing as the hours went by. Jamie spilled her soul to officers, describing her darkest fantasies and secret urges. She was still at the police station in the early morning hours of Tuesday, July 24, 2018, when officers received tragic news from the hospital. Maulin had succumbed to his injuries. The cause of his death was strangulation. Jamie's charges of attempted murder were upgraded to murder in the first degree. She was detained at the Sunbury police station as news of Maulin's death started to reach the media. Lovepreet Singh, a friend of Maulin's from university, was contacted by police to help identify his body. After they confirmed that the victim was indeed Maulin, police contacted his parents in India. Both Heer and Enchegrudi had been contacted by Singh on Monday morning. Singh had told Maulin's parents that he'd been injured and was taken to hospital. They were in the process of getting their visas approved to fly to Australia when police gave them the tragic news. As news of Maulin's death started to spread through Melbourne, Jamie too became a focus of media attention. The details of the crime disturbed and shook the normally safe and quiet community. But as Jamie's involvement in the crime came to light, those who knew her were not surprised that she'd committed such a heinous crime. It was soon revealed that Jamie was no stranger to law enforcement and had a very disturbing past of her own. Jamie Lee Dollaghy was born in October 1998 in Melbourne, Australia. Not much is known about her early life, except that she was raised in an abusive household. When Jamie was 10 years old, she and her siblings were removed from their home after her father repeatedly assaulted her mother in their presence. Social workers also discovered that Jamie and her siblings were victims of their father's anger.
Now let me take this knitting off.
Jamie lived in state care since
I
being
will
removed from
pause
her
the
parents'
video
home.
and set up for the
But
next time.
life didn't get any easier. Jamie's past trauma led to her developing a destructive personality. By the age of 14, she already had a lengthy criminal record and had done several stints in juvenile detention centers. Social workers reported that Jamie showed signs of borderline personality disorder and was prone to harming herself. She was then moved to a safe home by the Department of Health and Human Services. Teenage Jamie was placed under 24-hour surveillance and cared for by 2 state-appointed caregivers. However, upon turning 18, Jamie was left to live by herself as she was considered an adult by the state. It was after she was given her freedom that things became worse. Neighbors often reported Jamie for noise disturbance and fighting, occasionally requesting welfare checks. Every time police or social workers visited Jamie, she'd usually turn up a few days later at the police station or welfare offices with cakes and cards thanking them for supporting her. Jamie was known to switch between being violent and reckless to sweet and kind-hearted in an instant. And, like millions of teenagers around her, Jamie had taken to social media like a duck to water. She was known to upload pictures and write lengthy posts throughout the day on her various accounts. She shared numerous pictures of herself online. Some showed her dressed in costumes. Others were simple pictures with multiple filters added for different effects. She even uploaded some of her personal artwork. Her social media post painted a picture of a very troubled young woman. Jamie wrote long paragraphs detailing her traumatic childhood and the physical assault she'd endured at the hands of her father. She also wrote about her struggles with self-loathing, body image issues, and poor self-esteem. She made rants about hating skinny pretty girls online, and wrote at length about how she wanted to torture them. In some posts, she wrote about several attempts she'd made to take her own life and admitted to putting batteries in her body. This resulted in her having over 100 surgeries to remove foreign objects from her body. Jamie was obsessed with darkness and vampire mythology. One of her friends even claimed that Jamie had often told her she had a demon inside that wanted to come out every so often. The same friend, who wanted to remain anonymous, said that Jamie would suddenly start snarling and growling like a wolf at times. She'd even bite people who were standing too close when this happened. The friend described Jamie as being possessed, a claim that was repeated by multiple caregivers who had lived with Jamie while she was placed in the safe house. The caregivers described Jamie as a shape-shifting demon girl who was unpredictable and could flip a switch at any moment. A few weeks before Maulin's tragic murder, Jamie uploaded a disturbing post on social media. It had been a clear cry for help. In the post, she stated that no one believed her whenever she said she was not sane. She lived in constant fear of what lay behind the corners of her blackened heart. Jamie also wrote that she could no longer feel emotions or happiness. The only time she ever felt something was when she watched other people suffer. On the afternoon of July 23, 2018, hours before she murdered Maulin, Jamie sent one of her former caregivers a text message. In the message, she said that she was feeling really sick with herself. She expressed that she had bad temptations and wanted to call the police, but knew they wouldn't believe her if she explained these feelings to them. Hours later, Jamie's evil temptation would become a reality, and Maulin would be the victim of a senseless crime. Everyone involved in the case knew how complicated the situation was from the outset. Looking back at Jamie's past, prosecutors and investigators knew that the childhood trauma she'd endured had left her scarred for life. But she was not the victim in this case. It was Maulin Rathod, a young man with big dreams and the only child of two hardworking parents. Those dreams had been snuffed out by a young woman facing her own demons. In order to serve justice on behalf of Maulin and his parents, prosecutors and investigators hired the best clinical minds in Australia to assess Jamie psychologically. Meanwhile, Maulin's friends and colleagues in Australia helped raise funds to have his body returned to India so that his last rites could be performed in his home country. Maulin was cremated in India 12 days after his death. Over the next year, several psychologists studied and analyzed Jamie's behavior and how her past affected her actions. It was unanimously agreed by the clinical team that Jamie was one of the most psychologically damaged and troubled subjects they'd studied. Jamie was described as a ticking time bomb. After all the tests and assessments were carried out, Jamie was deemed fit to stand trial at the end of 2019. Jamie's trial began in late November 2019 at the Victoria Supreme Court, presided over by Justice Peter Almond. Jamie's case was heard before a jury. Maulin's parents in India were unable to attend the trial due to financial constraints, but they were kept up to date by his friends in Australia. Although she'd already confessed to the murder on several occasions, Jamie entered a plea of not guilty before the trial began. No one in the courtroom had any doubt that Jamie was responsible for killing Maulin. The argument instead focused on how Jamie's mental health had affected her decision-making and whether murderous intent could be proven. Jamie's defense lawyer, Sharon Lacey, pushed for the charge of murder to be dropped to the lesser charge of manslaughter. Lacey focused her argument around Jamie's childhood trauma and borderline personality disorder diagnosis. She argued that Jamie was severely damaged by childhood trauma and had suffered from stunted psychological development. She touched on Jamie's living conditions and the numerous times she attempted to harm herself. Lacey pointed out her client's lack of understanding of the enormity of the situation. Lacey argued that no jury could be sure that Jamie had any murderous intent, and therefore she couldn't be found guilty of murder.
A Sunbury woman who choked an Indian university student to death only hours after meeting him on a dating app has been acquitted of murder. Jamie Lee Dolgai admitted she felt good after strangling her victim, but a jury found she did not intend to kill him.
In court, Jamie's behavior played into her defense team's argument. She sat quietly coloring pictures, drawing, and making origami.
During the trial, Dolgai smiled to herself as she drew pictures using coloured pencils. Today, however, she simply stared at the floor. Her lawyers say they need until April next year to compile all of her psychiatric reports.
Jamie didn't seem to be focused on the case. She occasionally even smiled at the jury before returning to the activities she was occupied with. The prosecution was not deterred by the defense's argument. They admitted that Jamie had indeed suffered a great deal of trauma in her childhood, which had clearly affected her mental health. But they pointed out that Jamie knew beforehand that she was going to kill Maulin. Their proof was in the internet searches she'd made and the confessions she'd given to police officers about her desire to kill. They pointed out that in her confession, she admitted to sizing Maulin up and deciding it would be easy to kill him. The prosecution said that by her own admission, Jamie had given a detailed play-by-play of how she'd enjoyed the act of murder. The prosecution alluded to the social media posts, text messages sent to caregivers, and internet searches as being a strong basis for premeditated murder. After an 18-day-long trial, with several witnesses giving testimony on Jamie's behavior over the years, it was left up to the jury to decide the final verdict. When asked if there was any sign of murderous intent, the jury said none during deliberations. Instead, they moved to convict Jamie on the lesser charge of manslaughter, which in Australia carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. On December 20th, 2019, Jamie Lee Dolgai was found guilty of manslaughter for the death of Maulin Rathod. The following year, on October 22nd, 2020, Jamie Lee Dolgai was sentenced to 9 years in prison with a minimum term of 5 years. Judge Almond credited Jamie for the 2 years she'd already spent in prison, which could possibly see her getting released within 3 years, depending on her behavior.
Jamie Lee Dollar still has homicidal urges and she has threatened to kill another inmate. For now, she remains locked up in maximum security, but she could be freed on parole in just over 3 years.
Following the sentencing, many felt hurt by the lenient sentence delivered to Jamie. Opinions remain divided over her innocence due to past trauma and severe mental health issues, since there was also the glaring evidence that Jamie knew what she was doing, particularly with the internet searches she made before and after Maulin's murder. But the people most affected by Maulin's untimely death were his parents. The last time they ever saw their son was during the kite flying festival in 2018, when Maulin had returned to India for a visit. Both Hiran and Jagrudi were invited to attend a court hearing for the case in February 2020. At the hearing, they spoke about the pain of losing their only child and how their lives had been turned upside down. They only asked that the Australian court hand Jamie a harsh punishment for what she'd done. Their visit to Australia also allowed them a glimpse into the incredible strides Maulin had made for himself. Maulin's professors at the university remembered him as a brilliant student who worked hard and was bound to achieve great things in life. Hiran and Jagrudi were also grateful to those in Australia who had helped support them and assisted in the repatriation of Maulin's remains to India. Hiran fondly remembered Maulin, wanting both him and his wife to leave India and move to Australia where he could support them. Maulin wanted to give back to his parents in the same way they'd always supported him. Hiran and Jagrudi continue to live in India, but the death of their only child haunts them to this day. With each
Broken and damaged. Sometimes there is nothing anyone can do stemming from childhood trauma. But together with our community to help and identify